Hello everyone. Today I will be featuring the Duca degli Abruzzi. I have no idea if I mispronounced that. I probably did. I apologize preemptively, but deal with it. It's the upcoming Tier 7 Italian premium cruiser. Now you might call it the Duca number 2 or, well, basically the follow-up on the Duca. Now, first things you might notice, the health pool. It's pretty damn low at 32.5k. That's only 300 more than the Shores and significantly lower than, for example, Mayoko that has like 39.2k health. The armor values aren't impressive either. It's pretty much 16mm armor all across. In fact, the entire deck, both bow, stern and middle, is 16mm, which of course means that anything higher than 229mm will overmatch it. So that means even the Scharnhorst can overmatch your bow, stern and deck armor, which of course means you are pretty damn squishy. Add in the fact that the ship is pretty huge. I mean, if you look how much empty space there's both in front of the turrets and both behind the stern turrets, it's a long ship. There's a lot to hit, and the fact that it can't really eat or tank any damage means that this thing is pretty vulnerable. In fact, it's pretty vulnerable for everything. The upper belt is at least 20 mils. The upper belt is basically above the Citadel, the broadside there. That's called the upper belt. And that has 20mm armor, which is slightly better, but not nearly enough still. I mean, even it also means, of course, that HE will be extremely strong against the ship. Pretty much all forms of HE, even DDHE, will score full penetrations on the ship. So the thing is squishy. The Citadel is, however, quite well protected. The Citadel roof or Citadel deck is 40mm, so even if you get overmatched through the rest of the ship, at least the Citadel is unlikely to get overmatched by anything at all, or, well, get penetrated by anything at all. The Citadel itself on the belt, around the belt, is actually protected by spaced armor, which is of course really good in this game. I think it's a combination of 100mm armor on the Citadel itself and 30mm armor on the belt, so you won't be eating any HE Citadels because of course spaced armor absorbs the HE penetration, so it doesn't go further into the ship. So no HE Citadels, which is always good, and it's pretty damn trolly against other people trying to shoot it as well. In fact, people might get a lot of penetrations that deal 0 damage since they'll be able to pen the outer armor, but then the Citadel armor will bounce the shell, so to say. So they'll see penetration ribbons, but they won't actually see any damage. You might have noticed that I snuck up very close on this cap, and that's because the concealment is the mitigating factor. I just spoke how bad the armor is, I spoke how low the health pool is, and I spoke about how large this ship is, but the one mitigating factor, which is pretty significant, is the fact that it has a concealment of 9.5 kilometers, and this is by sea. By air it has a concealment of 6.7, so carrier or planes not that likely to spot you, and in general a very stealthy ship. And you can see, of course, well, this shore should be shooting HE. If the shores were shooting HE, this would be a significantly harder fight, but he's convinced that AP is the way to go, and I'm not entirely certain why, because if you angle like this, you don't really have too many issues against low caliber. If this was, of course, a Graf Spee or something similar, then he would be just overmatching my armor and getting massive pens. So the concealment is the strength, and of course this combination of squishiness and concealment means that you will be needing to use it quite a lot, especially as the speed isn't really that overwhelming. I mean, the speed is 35 knots, 36.8 with a flag. That's certainly decent. I mean, that's exactly the same as the Mayoko has, and you do beat some slowpokes like Atlanta and Belfast. Both of those are very slow. I think Atlanta is like 32.5 stock, so you're slightly faster than those, but ultimately it's not a speed beast that can just outrun anyone, but you have to play pretty damn safe. The rudder shift is at 7.1, that's with the turning module. That's not exactly ideal. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it's not ideal. And the turning circle is 680 meters. In fact, those values are pretty much exactly the same as the Belfast. So if you have a Belfast and you know how it handles, then the ship handles pretty much exactly the same, it's only slightly faster. So the difference is, of course, that this ship doesn't have access to any smoke, but in fact you have to survive in the open using it. So questionable survival, especially since the armor is so thin that you get overmatched by everything. It means that most of the time you'll find yourself kiting away and you'll find yourself disengaging because you can't really charge into anything because of the lack of armor. So this combination of great stealth and squishy armor, of course, indicates that it should be some sort of capture point fighter, like you want to brawl DDs. And that's kind of how I've been trying to play it. For example, here I pushed alone into A and I was hoping to find a DD to fight. But ultimately though, most of the time you engage a DD, he smokes up and then you're forced to run for your life as everyone starts firing upon you and you don't have the armor to really bounce any of the shells, so you're just hoping to get undetected as soon as possible. Not the most optimal of playstyles, considering it's not very consistent, and if you have bad luck with how you dodge, you can eat a lot of opening damage. So most of the time you do want to play it a bit safer. Playing it safer though can be a bit iffy because the default range is only 15.1 kilometers, but I'll return to that in a bit. The AA on the ship is garbage. Pretty much straight up garbage. The values are pretty low, and running the AA module that increases range gives you 4.8 max range. Now you could run AFT on top of this, but I don't consider it worth it, especially since I'm running my Duca degli Captain, which they share almost all the same traits. So the Duca degli Captain is of course very good on the Duca Abruzzi as well. But the AA is pretty garbage. However, you do have access to both the consumables, both Hydro and defensive AA, so that means you'll always have defensive AA ready, and you don't need to give up Hydro for it, which makes it significantly more comfortable because while you won't exactly be some sort of carrier terror, it's good if you want to protect yourself or some DDs around you if the carrier decides to go for you. The Hydro, well, it's default tier 7 Hydro. There's nothing special about it. 4.2 km range on ship detection and I think around 3 kilometers on torp detection. Not that special, but pretty useful on the ship, especially since if you do find DDs, you generally want to pressure them because with your concealment you can get very close, and if you force them to smoke and you're able to pressure the smoke, the Hydro is extremely useful. Now, returning back to what I consider the main issue here, which is the guns, the main guns. The HE is pretty normal, 2.1k alpha. I of course run IFHE because, well, 150 to 155 millimeter guns pretty much require IFHE, especially at this tier when you'll be facing a lot of ships that have enough armor to otherwise shatter all your HE without any issues. The problem here is, well, the guns have a 7.5 second reload, which is actually identical to Belfast reload, but the fire chance on these guns is only 5%. That's very similar to the Duca, which has an infamously low fire chance as well, but having that fire chance at tier 7 is not that ideal. Even the Belfast has a 7% fire chance. I mean, if you run flags and DE, you can buff it to 7% on the Abruzzi as well, but if you run the same on the Belfast, it becomes 9%. If you compare it to some real fire starter, like let's say the Shores has a 12% fire chance. It has an 8-second reload on the guns, but still it has a 12% fire chance. That's stock. Abruzzi 5%, Shores 12%. That's a pretty damn big difference. And even worse is, of course, when you compare the fact that both the Belfast and the Shores are 12-gun ships. The Abruzzi is only a 10-gun ship. In fact, it has 2 turrets with 2 guns and 2 turrets with 3 guns. So you are a pretty awful fire starter. You will struggle starting fires. And I mean, you can kind of see it right now. 145 hits, 5 fires. And get used to it. That's something you'll be seeing a lot with this ship. It struggles to deal raw fire damage, and that of course means that it struggles to deal with battleships, because just killing it with the HE alpha alone takes you such a long time, because once again you only really have 10 guns. So not really any sort of DPM monster here. Now, Another issue that I mentioned briefly earlier was the range. The range is 15.1 kilometers. This is very low. I mean, even the Belfast and the Fiji has 15.4 kilometers. Even the Pensacola has 15.7 kilometers. So you understand that 15.1 is pretty damn underwhelming. Now I've been trying to work around it. In fact, you can note that I've been using the spotter plane, and I'm also using the module that increases the duration of spotter plane. So instead of a 100-second spotter plane, I have a 130-second spotter plane, and I've found this to be extremely useful in helping mitigate these range issues, especially if matchmaking throws you into these higher tier maps. If you get something like Okinawa and tier 9 matchmaking, then having access to that spotter plane with the increased duration module is a lifesaver. However, returning once more to the guns, I did mention I don't like the guns too much, and that's the air drag on the shells. The shell velocity is very misleading on this ship. In fact, if you would just look at the raw stats, you can see that the HE shells have a almost 1 kilometer per second. I think it was 995 meter per second HE shell velocity, and the AP sits at like 910. So the initial impression is that the shell velocity would be great, but the air drag is so massive on the shells that they just end up feeling weird, because you're there you saw overmatch, by the way. The Nelson shot me, I was angled, he just overmatched all my armor and pretty much blapped half my health. So that is of course a huge issue with this armor. Also, you see I'm dropping my torps. Before I return to guns, I might as well mention them. The torps are not really that special. They are 12 kilometer torps, which is great range, just like the Duca degli, but they're also incredibly slow at 51 knots. So that means they are incredibly situational. They only deal 13.4k damage per torp, so you can't really rely on them too much. They're not that good for YOLO, but if you do remember to use them regularly, you can every now and then score the surprise hit on especially quite stationary battleships like this one. So they're not useless, but they're not really that special. Returning back to the guns though, the air drag is really my major issue with this ship. Obviously a combination of stealth or concealment and squishiness, and in general pretty decent gun power, especially short range shell velocity, would indicate that they want this ship to be played as a close range cruiser. Basically you fight the DDs inside caps and so forth, but in reality I think everyone knows that that's not very, it doesn't really work that well. Because you're so squishy and you get overmatched, and when there's 3 battleships sitting on the enemy team sniping, or 5 battleships, that's usually more the case, the second you're spotted near a cap fighting their DD, you're gonna have every single battleship aiming at you. And that means quite often you have to play it safe, and you have to play it at range like I'm doing here, and this really weird shell velocity. You can see it, 11-second travel time, that's he's 15 kilometers away. Actually 14.4, and that's still an 10-second, 11-second travel time on my shells, and it's the air drag, and it's massive, and this of course greatly affects AP performance as well, because well, your shells slow down so extremely much. Even after playing the ship for a couple of days, I still think the guns feel weird. I still feel they are inconsistent, or I basically just struggle dealing with the guns. I've been able to have like good games, but I've never really felt satisfied with the guns, and I would love for them to maybe get rid of some of the air drag, so that the ship would feel more consistent, the shells would feel more consistent, and the AP in return would of course become more reliable, since well, it would be less of this weird plunging fire without all the plunging characteristics of, for example, US AP. But ultimately though, the ship, I mean, it's not a bad ship. The Abruzzi isn't a bad ship, but it's not an easy ship to play, and I would say it's quite a challenging ship to do well in. The Duca was also quite a challenging ship to do well in, but I do consider the Duca was simply more fun than the Abruzzi is right now, because the Abruzzi, you always feel like you're struggling to do your thing, and there are many situations where I found myself, if I was in a shores right now, I would be melting these people, but because I'm in an Abruzzi, I am incapable of doing it. And in fact, I found myself comparing quite often. If I was in a Fiji right now, if I was in a Belfast, okay, Belfast is of course a bit of a bad example since it's a broken ship, but I often found myself wishing I was in another cruiser instead of the cruiser I was in, and that's not really a good sign of the ship itself. I'm not gonna call it a bad ship because I don't think it's straight up bad, but it's not really that special either. It doesn't really have anything special going for it, and I think maybe they should give it some more Italian flavor. There are some ideas I have with this. One is possibly the air drag, like give it more of those Italian railgun type guns, like more consistency across the board with the guns. Or alternatively, if they want the guns to be not that reliable on long ranges to mitigate long range playstyle, that's also an option. But in that case, maybe give the ship more speed. Give it that Italian speed and make it significantly faster. That way, playing that sort of close range combat style, going in, wrecking the DDs, getting out, that kind of playstyle would become a lot more reliable and consistent, because then you would have some sort of tool to help you survive. Because right now you are moving at the speed of a Mayoko, without the armor of a Mayoko, without the health of a Mayoko, and trying to push in and kill DDs and then get out alive. And it's not a consistent playstyle, and I don't think it's a sustainable playstyle either. And when people learn just how squishy this ship is, when more people understand just how squishy it is, I think a lot of more people will start firing at it. And 32.5k health with 16mm armor is a juicy target for everyone. That includes DDs. If I was in a DD, I would probably shoot at the Abruzzi all the time, because that's guaranteed full penetrations. And I mean, a 3k HE volley from a DD doesn't sound like much, but it's 10% of the health of this ship. So yeah, this thing, it needs something. It needs something more to be able to compete. Tier 7 is also, of course, notoriously the power creep tier, so you're going to be facing a lot of monsters like the Nelson, the Belfast, the Fiji, and things like this. Not to mention things like Saipan and Kaga, which you can at least deal with somewhat well since you have defensive AA always. But overall, right now, the Abruzzi is not really a ship I can recommend, because I feel it lacks something. It lacks something. It doesn't feel rewarding. It feels frustrating. Score-wise, 141k damage, which is of course pretty nice. I made some nice credits, probably a combination of course of running premium time on flags and so forth. 9 cap defenses, only 1 assisted cap. You can get a bit more thanks to the stealth, because you can play quite aggressively if the situation allows or recommends it. Only 11 fires with 259 hits, not surprising, in fact probably more than you will usually get, because fires are scarce, they are very rare. Team score wise, 2.2k base XP. Matchmaking was pretty favorable, tier 5 to tier 7. You won't necessarily always get this, and honestly the higher the tiers, the more the ship will struggle, but that's pretty much the case with all ships though, so bit of an empty statement in that sense. Of course, the biggest problem is bigger, larger, more open maps. All cruisers suffer from that, but the Abruzzi especially, since you don't really want to be playing at long range as much with it, but you're often forced to do it, and the higher tier maps are of course bigger and more open, which will force you to do... It will force you to play the ship in a way that isn't necessarily recommended. And detailed report, 235 HE hits, and the 11 fires only did 34k damage, not surprising. 1 torp landed, you might get more, you might get less. Overall, not really that special damage-wise, and I really haven't had any that special damage-wise games in this ship, because it's hard to get it. It's hard to get that raw damage in this ship, because the complete lack of fire chance means that you're missing out on such a huge chunk of damage, and only having 10 guns when the big DPM competition that you're fighting has 12 guns, it's, as I said, it feels frustrating. It feels like you're kind of fighting with one arm against everyone else, and I don't really like that. Anyway, let me show you guys my recommended build for this ship. As usual, I will start with the modules. Now, upgrade-wise, there's not much to talk about, or module-wise, since there's nothing to upgrade on this premium. Consumable-wise, premium damage control, probably most important if you need to repair fires to get undetected, even if fires last a substantially shorter time ever since the changes. I would probably prioritize premium hydro and premium spotter plane with defensive AA as the last one, because the only time you'll really need defensive AA on the ship is mostly to defend yourself, because the AA ranges are pretty damn weak at defending anyone else. However, if a carrier happens to go for some DD near you or go for you, it's always useful to have it. So if you can afford it, of course, go full premium consumables. Upgrade-wise, I do run the spotting plane module, as I mentioned. It's to help compensate for the lack of range, and this increases the duration of your spotter plane from the default 100-second duration to 130-second duration, which can be extremely useful. If you don't have this, just go for the main armaments mod 1, aka turret survival. AA range, because it's the most useful module you can slot in this spot. Hydroacoustic search duration, which means longer hydro. If you don't have this one, then just run, I'd probably run maybe steering gears, since that tends to get knocked out quite often, especially as you're kiting away and shells land on the stern of the ship. And finally, of course, faster rudder shift time, because maneuverability is what keeps you alive as a cruiser. Captain-wise, I've just straight up been using my Duca degli captain, and I think it fits this role extremely well. Priority number 1 is of course priority target, followed by adrenaline rush, followed by fire chance, extremely important on the Abruzzi since the fire chance is so damn low. Concealment expert for that survival, IFHE for that raw damage. And once you have this basic 14-point build, then you can add things like vigilance, because torpedoes are going to be probably the biggest threat for both for you and the Duca d'Aosta, since you want to be pushing and fighting DDs a lot in it. Follow it up with preventive maintenance, and finally expert loader to be able to switch ammo type faster. Sorry about my phone. I really do need to learn to put it on silent. Flag-wise, speed is really damn useful, because, well, you find yourself having to disengage quite often if you get spotted, because of course the squishiness. Fire chance, very important as well, because, well, low base fire chance means that these flags are significantly stronger. Probably faster consumable usage, since you have 4 of them that you want to be using. But other than that, it's kind of up to you. I mean, you could run detonation flag, you could run things like AA flag, but probably pretty wasted on the ship. The rest of the stuff you can put into either money if you need it, or XP, depending on whatever you feel like. And the camo, I might as well show off the camo, since I do quite like the look of the default camo. And this is the default Duca d'Aosta camo. So it's not a bad looking ship per se. I actually think it's Luigi di Savola. Yeah. It's actually a pretty nice looking camo. So if you don't want to use any different camos, then the default premium camo is quite nice looking. Anyway, that was my Duca degli Abruzzi. I have no idea how to pronounce that. I'm sorry to anyone I'm sorry to any Italians who feel that I butchered their language. But I hope you guys enjoyed this commentary, and I will talk to you later.